right, good morning everyone. My name is Kayla Elise. I am the Marketing Manager for Wardy IT and MOQ Digital. And welcome to our webinar, Things DBA Should Be Doing to Protect Your Data During a Crisis. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to jump on board. So we'll probably start 2 or 3 minutes past. We have opened up to the Q&A on the right-hand side of the screen, so feel free to send through any questions throughout the webinar, and Phil and Stephen will do their best to answer them. Yeah, we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, Phil, we're at 3 minutes past, so I think we'll get started.
Okay, welcome everyone to another Wardy webinar. My name's Phil Jones. For those who don't know me, I lead the professional services practice here at Wardy IT Solutions. I've got a background as a SQL Server DBA, as a consultant, and also as a data platform solutions architect. Today we're here to be discussing the role of a DBA in response to a crisis. And I'm sure, given the current circumstances, everyone on the call will find this subject quite topical. Data is the new oil. This catchphrase, coined by The Economist in 2017, has actually caused a lot of debate over the ethics of large tech giants. We're talking about you, Facebook. Using and exploiting what they know about us like some sort of commodity. However, what this phrase does highlight is just a simple truth. As far as business is concerned, an organisation's data is a very valuable asset, arguably only playing second fiddle to an organisation's people. Now, simplistically, data enables organisational decision making, not only by delivering insights into an organisation's performance, but in the age of machine learning, of predictive analytics and artificial intelligence. In some ways, we can look at data as an enabler of a crystal ball view of an organisation's future. It's absolutely valuable. My opinion is that the role of a database administrator is to be that custodian and guardian of an organisation's data. We are there to protect data from being accessed by individuals or organisations that don't have authority to do so. We're there to ensure that in the event of data loss, we can recover our organisation's data to a point in time and in an efficient enough method to ensure that that organisation's viability is not put at risk. We're there to ensure that data is not lost or corrupted by system failures, by process failures, or by inadvertent or nefarious actions. And we're there to monitor and to react to how data is accessed and to make sure that the structures, the platforms, and the systems that we rely on to deliver data effectively and efficiently to business are configured correctly and resourced appropriately. Now, in a time of crisis, like the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic that obviously we're all living through right now, as human beings, we all respond differently. Now, according to the US Department of Health and Human Services, some of us will remain calm and carry on, as they say, but others may become stressed. Now, in time of stress, we may not be able to juggle multiple facts. We may not remember as much information as we normally would. And we may even misinterpret confusing action messages. Now, in response to a crisis, as DBAs, we may have actually been instructed to compromise our usual standards, to compromise our processes in order to enable some sort of new normal. Now, for example, has your security team punched a hole in a firewall so that administrators can access systems remotely? Or has your development team fast-tracked the development of a new solution in reaction to the crisis, going around or ignoring your usual quality, governance, testing, or change control processes in order to get that product or service to market as soon as possible so that your business remains viable? Now, has the performance and workload requirements of your organisation's data platform changed due to this crisis? Now, while many organisations, unfortunately, have gone into some sort of hiatus, many are actually busier than usual. And many are turning to their data to deliver insights in order to find ways to not only survive this crisis, but to thrive during, but also after the crisis event. So is your data platform configured and resourced appropriately in response to this new normal? As this new normal settles in, and as we all get used to this as a new form of business as usual, it's up to us as DBAs to ensure that your organisation's valuable data assets remain protected from unauthorised access, that we can recover data in the event that it's lost, that data remains protected from corruption, that it's delivered to business in an efficient and effective manner, and that we do so without compromising on our standards of quality. Now, I'd like to introduce today's special guest speaker, Stephen Fay. Now, Stephen's a Microsoft certified professional and senior data platform consultant here at Wardy IT Solutions. He's worked with SQL Server for over 20 years in Australia, in Canada, and in the US. Steve's also a regular attendee and speaker at the Queensland SQL Server User Group. So if you've attended one of them, you've probably met or seen Steve. So from primary industries, healthcare, and the gaming market, and everything in between, Steve's always looked at delivering timely and successful outcomes in that data platform space. And he says, having a little fun along the way. As a highly experienced DBA and consultant, Stephen has put together 10 tips or strategies that DBAs should consider in response to a crisis. Stephen, welcome, and it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, one of the challenging aspects of the current COVID-19 response was that we went from business as usual to most of us working from home over a period of just a few days. This meant that there was little time to plan and perhaps refine system processes, refine access policies to reflect that new normal. Now, why do you think this is an issue, and what suggestions would you have for everyone out there to make sure that those who require access to database and other related systems can actually access these systems? And I know you've got a little pertinent story to tell us as well.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so with the new normal and people working from home and obviously changes to on-call and things like that, it brought to mind a story of when I was working in Vancouver. We'd had a heat wave in Vancouver, and the server room had had a meltdown, the air conditioning had stopped. So at that point, we had 2 on-call people. One of them was in a bad accident and was unfortunately in hospital. The second on-call person had decided, because nothing had ever happened when he was second on call, that he was going to go up a mountain and proposed to his then girlfriend. The CIO was actually in holidays in France, so no one could actually access the server room. They hadn't left any keys, or building management couldn't get in. You know, normally it wouldn't have been a problem. Maybe a server or 2 would melt down, but hopefully they'd get away with it. And, you know, this is kind of pre-serious virtualization days. What had happened was the CEO was trying to send an email at that very time that the email server wasn't working. So then escalated it, rang the CIO in France. The CIO in France couldn't do anything. He was promptly removed from his position. So I suppose, though not really a database story, I suppose my point of the story there is that have a plan and idea of escalation paths. Obviously, you can't plan for every contingency, but think about things that can happen, who needs to have access, why and when, not just physical, but obviously remote and emergency access as well, and make sure that the people that need to be able to get into places can get into places, both logically and physically. You know, we had at the time C-level members of staff that were unable to access the server room. So looking back, it kind of seems like, well, you know, how did that happen? And I suppose it's because at the time, as an organisation, there wasn't a clear and consistent plan about how people were going to access it and when and how they were going to access it. And I suppose to bring that back to a database point of view, you know, talking SA access and things like that, it's about understanding who has access to your databases. I mean, these days with you know, T-SQL and other auditing devices, it's pretty easy to make a report that's going to show you who's got SA. So I'd suggest you kind of have that report. It's a recurring report. You could even do some exception reporting on it if you really wanted to, around, you know, people becoming levels of access that they shouldn't have. So I think it's just about, as I said, understanding who needs to have access and making sure you've got a way to know that the right people have got access. Because obviously what happens is, we've seen a lot, is that access can snowball, right? The longer that a resource has been around, the more and more people get access to it, or groups, and the more and more that kind of snowballs, because, well, the last person had DB owner, so I'll just make the next person who needs access DB owner. So from a database point of view, I think it's very important to understand why you're actually giving someone access and when you need to give them that access, and maybe when that access expires. It's something we don't see a lot of in the DBA world, is actually access expiring and making sure we take action to remove those people from where they don't need access.
Awesome tips there, Steve. Thanks for that. So I suppose for some DBAs out there, this new normal means that they're actually less busy than usual. Projects that they were working on may have been put on hold or cancelled, and due to reduced database workloads, perhaps their day-to-day administrative activities may just require less attention. So what tips do you have, Steve, for DBAs out there that might find themselves less busy than usual?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So, you know, I think we were just talking then about access. I mean, that's a great initiative there, is to get some reporting around your access, or some understanding about who has access to your databases. So right there, there's an initiative that stands up on its own 2 feet, says, hey, you know, do something about it. And I think that's a great one. And the other ones you've got mentioned here, archiving, partitioning, and alerting. I think archiving and partitioning is always something that gets talked about and gets pushed back, as it's often seen as too hard or too troublesome. But, you know, now's the time to, if you're quieter than normal, now's the time to start looking at a plan. It's not even, taking the initiative isn't about, oh, I woke up this morning and I implemented partitioning across my entire organisation. It's about making a plan, and often the longest journey is you got to take the first step, as they say. So, you know, start looking at partitioning and seeing kind of what performance benefits you can get for your organisation and your database. And I think as part of that, you're going to get a chance to review your internal processes as well in terms of archiving and partitioning and performance. So I think it's about taking the initiative. It doesn't have to be a huge, big thing. I mean, read some articles, put together a quick proof of concept. You know, prove to yourself and your organisation that there's things that we can do better around archiving and partitioning. I think the third point as well, alerting. It's not just alerting. I often find DBAs are very quick to think of alerting that, something's gone wrong with my SQL Server. I've gone past an alert threshold, severity 20, say, and so I'm alerting from it. Obviously, that kind of alerting is important. And if you haven't got that, then definitely take the initiative and start setting up alerting around that. But it's about alerting the right people with the right level. And there's another facet that I like to talk about, which is called business alerting, right? This allows you to be proactive. This isn't necessarily a technical alert to say something's gone wrong with the SQL Server. It's around having alerting that is triggered by certain data, certain thresholds, that allows you to be proactive, that an email can go out to, say, the sales team on a Tuesday morning and say, you may experience difficulties with XYZ, or we've noticed that some data is missing from a report that you're going to want to run later in the day. So be proactive with your alerting. And I find that business users as a whole appreciate being proactive rather than at the time they need the report going to run it at 11 a.m. and the data's not there. They'd much prefer to know at 7:30, 6 a.m. whenever you've set your alert, 4 a.m. that data is missing and that steps are being taken to rectify that. It's a big time saver all around, and I think it's one that you should seriously think about. Is the business alerting, not just technical alerting. Talking of technical alerting, think about the exception reporting that you can do. There's no point having a bunch of alerts go out that people aren't going to action. The alert, an alert that comes through should be a call to action, and it should have meaningful content that the person who gets that alert can make decisions around what needs to happen. Obviously, if we're in quieter times or if you're in busier times, obviously the new normal, as we're calling it now, another initiative you could look at is maybe scheduling some of that processing around a different time. You may have people working different hours because they're working from home now. So you might have C-level staff starting earlier in the morning. So if you've had a reporting run that was finishing at 7 a.m. and they want to be looking at that data, maybe you can move that scheduling to later or earlier depending on what fits. So that's another good initiative. And I think there's lots of things out there that you can look at. And probably the main takeaway I want to say from that is it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. It can just, as I said, it can just be little things, proof of concepts, improving alert here or there, improving the content of an alert email. So, grab the initiative and start making little changes that's going to make your life easier and make your organisation function a lot better as a whole.
We just had a question come through, Steve, on escalations in particular.
Yeah.
Are there any tools to provide timed escalations of DB privileges, i.e. like just an in-time security escalation and revocation, sorry?
So I believe there's a range of third-party auditing tools or alerting tools that can kind of do that for you. There's definitely things you can write in T-SQL that will do that as well. I've seen a couple of good articles around doing that with time jobs and also triggers, and you can definitely, there is a lot of auditing in SQL now. So I would be looking at, if you didn't have a third-party tool, I'd be looking at maybe writing some custom functions in T-SQL to alert you to logins and alert you to increased levels of security. I'm happy to share some stuff after around some of the articles I've seen around that. Certainly, that's something that I've seen. And another thing I've seen as well is, because it doesn't do it by default, another one we get asked often about is, how can I stop users from connecting to how can I stop users from connecting to my primary when I only ever want them to connect to secondary, as in they're only reporting level users and I never want to see their load on my read-write primary. So you can definitely write things around that as well. And it's just around control, as I said, controlling who has access and when, and making sure you escalate that. So I'm happy to share some of those T-SQL tips and tricks around monitoring that.
Awesome, some great tips there, Steve. Now, I'm sure everyone's heard the saying, failing to plan is planning to fail. And also that other saying, it's never too late to make a plan. Ensuring that in the event of a crisis, your organisation has an effective business continuity plan is absolutely essential. Steve, what role do you see the DBA taking in a BCP?
I think what often happens with DBAs is that they feel like they just look after databases or look after database servers, and they don't need to be super involved with the BCP because that's the business side of things. I actually think about it differently. I think that because we're looking after the databases and we're at the end of the road, if you will, with the last station, everyone's coming to us. That's where the data's coming from, right? So in my mind, I think it's very important for database admins to be a leader, understand what I like to call boxes make up a system or an application. Not saying that you need to understand every little box and how it works, or be a web dev and be a storage guy or anything like that, but to understand where those boxes fit and how they access and interact with your databases. I think that's important. Then you can use that knowledge to really kind of drive that BCP and understanding of, well, in this disaster recovery scenario, we're going to have users manually do this or manually do that, or we can file over here. And it's a living document, the BCP. I mean, now that people are working differently and working from home, BCP should be changing, right? Because we know now that people can work remotely. We know now the entire teams can work remotely. So that BCP can change. And obviously, if you haven't tested your BCP, or what's the point of it? It's the same as having a backup that you haven't tested, right? So how does my business survive when we all go to paper? Or how does my business survive when we no longer have a physical place to work from? So what does it mean, I suppose, when the person that has all the domain knowledge around a particular subject all of a sudden has no internet access now because they're at home and someone dug up a cable and they're in a valley and they don't even have any 4G. So it's also, as you know, again, talking logical and physical, it's logically about how these things are going to work, but physically, how are you going to solve this, right? So in your to-go kit, which is for your on-call bag with your laptops and things like that, have you got a to-go bag with a laptop that's ready to go? Has it got a 4G dongle that can connect and do what you need to do remotely? So little things like that, and it's about the DBA working with all parts of the business, and I believe, as I like to say, understanding the boxes that make up the application so they can inform the business that when certain things happen, this is what will need to happen from a database point of view. If you can't tell your business what it means when you file over to a data center, well, you need to find out what it means when you file over to a data center and what that means for the business. Does that mean your business is going to be manually writing numbers down for a day, an hour? No, not at all. So you need to be able to say, this is what's going to happen, and be strong in saying, look, if you don't have a BCP, we need to write a BCP, because it's not just the business person's or the business unit's responsibility to come up with a BCP. It's the technical team's responsibility as well. And they should be driving that if they don't have one. Because what that means is that by the end of it, you should be understanding your systems a lot better. You should be understanding, as I said, what it means if a failover occurs or the power goes out to the data center, or certain people can't access the system when they need to. So I think you have to, if you don't have a BCP, don't wait, get one. You know, we were just talking about taking the initiative, take the initiative. If you have got one, review it, because it has to have changed, I would imagine, now that we have large units of people working from home, working remotely, that haven't seen each other for a long amount of time. And then obviously test your BCP. Now's a great time, because I mean, you've just been forced to test it, right? You've just tested your remote working from home because everyone's been working from home. But now what's it look like when everyone goes back to the office? Now COVID's still impacting us, and you know, we might have half the office going back in, we might have 3/4 of the office. Well, what does that mean? How do we make sure that that business keeps working? So another great example of taking the initiative is really start driving your BCP. And as I said, I believe that database admins are an integral part to your BCP, because everyone's connecting and pulling that data. So you need to be part of it.
That's fantastic. Steve, I think a point that really resonated there was understanding all of the boxes that make part of that solution. I've certainly seen DR plans in the past where, you know, the data platform was protected by some sort of failover technology, but then we would see, you know, a DR scenario would have a failover, but the application was still in the primary data center with no way of connecting to the DR site. So it is a more holistic strategy rather than just that database DR plan. Fantastic. So we'll move on to the next one, the next tip here. So we all know as DBAs that capacity planning is an absolutely fundamental part of our roles. However, Typically, we map out growth trends over the medium to short term and then develop our capacity plans to suit that are executed as part of normal infrastructure refresh programs. So we're talking about timings around, over months or years. Now, COVID-19 has turned this process on its head. Some organisations' database workloads requirements have collapsed, while other workload requirements have increased significantly over a very short period of time. Steve, what strategies do you have in mind to ensure that our data platforms are resourced in a way that reflects the new normal?
I think, again, it's coming back to understanding that increase and decrease depending on what kind of reality your business has got now. I think it all comes back, obviously, to understanding that. So what have you got in place, I suppose, to understand your capacity? What kind of reporting? What kind of understanding of what that means? Benchmarking, things like that. And I suppose now, we're seeing a lot of organisations obviously using the cloud. It's a great time now to look at your cloud consumption in terms of my increase or my decrease. And again, as I spoke about just before, in terms of changed hours and people working from home and stuff like that, do you need to extend the time that your development environment is up during the day because now devs are working longer hours or shorter hours? And what monitoring do you have in place to report, okay, this server is doing nothing now because, I don't know, because there's no more sales or not as many sales. So can I scale that down and save some money? So again, it's about understanding. So how do we understand that? Well, it's through reporting and it's through understanding your systems. So if I don't have that monitoring in place, how can I do my capacity planning? So obviously, again, there's lots of third-party tools, but obviously an often overlooked one is Azure Monitor. If you've got AWS, things like that, if you've got things running in the cloud, you should be able to tell pretty easily what that consumption is looking like, and make the suggestion. Again, talking about take the initiative. Go to management and say, oh, look, I think these servers can be scaled back or scaled up because I believe someone's being impacted, or I think we're spending too much money. So using those tools available to us, I think, is important. I think we can get, as DBAs, I think we can get complacent about, well, that server's sitting there and it's running and it's doing its job, and I don't need to worry about what it's doing. And I've done my storage capacity planning, and that's all I need to do. Well, now with VMs and also in the cloud, it's all around compute as well, right? To understand your compute that's happening, understand the resources that your server's using, and make informed decisions to your management about how you can make that application run better, or how you can ultimately save some money for your organisation moving forward.
Great tips there, Steve. So I'm sure we'd all agree that a crisis is not a great time to have an unexpected outage occur, especially if through being proactive or identifying issues early, that outage could have been entirely avoided. Steve, when I asked you this question when we were planning for this session, you immediately jumped out with perform a health check. Would you like to explain?
Sure. So as I just touched on earlier, I see a lot of DBAs. I built my server, it's sitting there, it's all good, it's working, it's running, it needs to do what I do, but we often don't revisit those servers. So I think it's important to have scheduled health checks, and obviously pick a schedule that makes sense to your organisation. It doesn't have to be super heavyweight. I mean, obviously the more lightweight, the better it is. So, you really want to ensure the availability, reliability, and scalability of your SQL Server platform. So, what I'm talking about there is, database fragmentation, a database integrity check, database options. Is your file sizing right? Are your files in the right location? Do a database recoverability review. Test your backups. What does that mean? Can I recover when I need to? Maintenance and backup job review. Is my maintenance jobs running? Are they running correctly in a timely manner? Am I getting any weird alerts that I need to jump on? Again, take the initiative. Make sure my SQL Server configuration options are correct. My SQL Server and Windows performance are correct. Look at some counters. Do a perfmon. Collect some counters. There's a great tool out there called PAL, which if you use a template and give it some perfmon counters, it produces a great little report. It's all open source and free. It's a great little starting point for understanding how your SQL Server and your Windows box is performing. So that's the PAL tool, and you can just choose a template for your version of SQL. Let those counters run for a time that makes sense and load them up into the Power Tool. It's a great little tool. I'm surprised more people don't use it, you know, and it's just a starting point. It's not the Bible, but it's a great little starting point. And then also you're talking about your table and index analysis. So, you know, is there a chance to look at tables and indexes and stuff? As part of that health check as well, I think it's important that you're benchmarking your system. It doesn't really fall in a health check, but I'm kind of including it. So I think either underload, or if your system is quiet, what does that look like? What is my benchmark there? Because that's going to allow you to be proactive, right? How can you set alerts that we were talking about previously if you don't know what an alert condition looks like? But also a health check and benchmarking gives you ammunition, right, to go to management to finance upgrades, new hardware, more resources in the cloud. If you don't have any empirical data, how can you point out issues with your systems? And then on the flip side, how can you prove that you've fixed the issues over time if you're not running health checks on a consistent basis? So I urge you to start looking into some simple health checks, or if you like, some more complex health checks. Obviously, it's around maintenance jobs and stuff, but reporting on those maintenance jobs as well, and making sure that they're running and they do what they are supposed to be doing, and not just sitting there and ticking over. So I think a health check is very important. And as I just said, I think one of the main reasons is it's going to give you a chance to prove that your system is getting better because you're making fixes and you're making changes that improve your system. You don't want your system just sitting there for years and you've got no idea about how it's performing, so that when you do get a performance problem, you don't know if that's been happening for a long time or short time. So yeah, definitely start looking into a health check again. Back to the old take the initiative. Start getting some health checks set up on a schedule that makes sense for your organisation.
Awesome, Steve. So let's all make sure that we're performing health checks proactively, so we're addressing issues before they turn into incidents. So, Steve, as discussed earlier, with projects on hold or cancelled, perhaps there are DBAs out there looking to take the initiative and perhaps address issues that they previously didn't have time to address. One of these is in relation to workarounds. Can you explain to everyone what a workaround is and why implementing a permanent fix is a great initiative to take?
So, you know, we're talking about workarounds. You know, we could be talking like a nightly data fix that runs, or things that you've discovered in your health check and you maybe have never got around to fixing because it wasn't really causing a problem and wasn't, you know, something that you were too concerned about. So you just wrote a quick fix, you know, you just worked a workaround. So, you know, every night at say 11 p.m, something happens in my database to fix a data problem or something that I've got. So I think you really want to start looking at making those fixes permanent. I've got a tiny little example around that. There was a pharmacy stock system that every night when certain conditions happened, it would do a double removal of stock from the pharmacy system. So there was a workaround fix in place that did some little T-SQL trickery on a table and fixed that issue. So that the problem with that was it had become the new norm. So not only was that job running every day, there was someone on the pharmacy side of things that was manually checking to make sure that the condition hadn't occurred. I believe there was even some alerting and reporting around it. But what it meant was there was a lot of extra overhead for the DBA if there happened during an outage or the job didn't run or a range of different reasons why that data fix wasn't appropriate at the time. So the problem with that was the vendor wasn't interested in fixing it. So it's a tough one to turn into a permanent workaround. It's not even your application to begin with, but you have to drive it. Again, I'm talking about DBAs driving things internally and with the vendor. So then, you know, a fix was able to get made with a DBA driving it. It was able to get put in, and that meant that that job didn't have to run again every night, reduced the overhead both for DBA staff and for pharmacy staff. So I suppose what I'm talking about there is find things that you've kind of fixed, and they don't have to be data fixes. There can be a range of different things, both business and technical. Is there something in physical equipment that you've done a workaround in that, you know, maybe you should fix up? You've got an old, you know of a UPS that kind of has got a bit dodgy batteries in it and I've never got around to changing them. You know, it can also include things like security. is there a database there where you just giving blanket DB owner permissions? I mean, that's a workaround, right? That's not understanding. That's you not understanding security that needs the application to work properly. So those kind of things, I think, is a great chance to get in and fix those permanently. Event viewer. So there's nagging alerts in event viewer that aren't really affecting anything, but take the chance to look at those and maybe permanently fix the problem with those. Work with your vendors and work with your business to make these things permanent fixes. So over time, they don't become a problem, and keep increasing manual overhead, both for technical and non-technical staff.
Awesome. So let's pull off that gaffer tape and start problem solving. So time flies. It was almost 6 months ago that Microsoft ended support for SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2. But what does this mean? Well, as DBAs, are you holding up your end of the bargain as being the guardian and custodian of your organisation's data if your data platform is actually out of date? Steve, can you explain why vendor support is just so important, and especially so during a crisis?
Well, as you mentioned previously, Phil, I mean, the data is one of your most valuable assets, and so what you're doing if you're not patching and you're not putting security fixes in, you're putting business data at risk basically at the end of the day. Really, these days, with the streamlined patching process from Microsoft, just CUs for SQL and all the automated things we have available for Windows operating system patching, there's really no excuse to have your operating system or your SQL Server lagging behind in security fixes. And it's not just about security fixes, it's about staying current as well, as you mentioned. SQL 2012 extended support is up in July 2022, and SQL 2014 extended support is up in 2024, which kind of sounds like, a long way away, but I thought I'd been working from home for 5 weeks the other day and it'd been 10 weeks. So, I obviously don't have a good judge of time at the moment. So, 2022 is 18 months away. How long is it going to take you to migrate your organization's ERP onto a new platform? Can your mission critical systems rely on an unsupported platform? And it's also around compliance. If you've got any compliance needs as well, obviously you have to mention that. And I think even if you don't have compliance thing, I think there's a couple of good little security controls that I'm just going to read quite quickly from the Australian Government Information Security Manual. Security Control 1143, a patch management process and supporting patch management procedures is developed and implemented. And I think that's a great security control. So what is your patch process? What does it look like? Is it mature enough? Do you have a dev and a UAT, and then before you push the patch out to prod? Do you understand what applications need to get tested when you upgrade a SQL Server? Do you understand what needs to happen after you've patched, before you've patched? So it's around not just having a patch process, but having a mature patch process, and having everyone invested in that, both technical people and business people as well. There's no excuses anymore for not having outages and not patching. I mean, with all the high availability options now, and businesses as well, if businesses are holding you up, if your business side of things is holding you up, you need to drive it. There's plenty of ammo out there now to prove why patching needs to happen. It's not good enough now to say, oh, I've got a 24/7 system, I can't patch my SQL anymore. That just doesn't hold, this doesn't cut the mustard anymore. Another security control I just wanted to read quickly was 0304 from also the Information Security Manual from the Australian Government. Applications that are no longer supported by vendors with patches or updates for security vulnerabilities are updated or replaced with vendor supported versions. So if you're running an out of version SQL, you really should start looking to move that, and the sooner the better, because it's a security concern. It's also, at the end of the day, it can be a performance concern as well. There's plenty of new features and functionality in SQL that can give you business benefits. So look at some of those and use that as a driver to go to your management and say, this is obviously there's the security reasons why we need to upgrade, but there's also some performance and business benefits for doing it as well.
I can't believe it's only 18 months to 2022 and SQL Server 2012 end of life. That's it's unbelievable. So, ensuring that only individuals with authorization to access your organised data can in fact access this data is an absolutely fundamental role of a DBA. So Steve, what strategies and tips do you have to protect our data from unauthorized access?
Well, I think the first step, if you haven't done it, is to actually run a vulnerability assessment or a security review. I mean, now from SQL Management Studio, you can run a vulnerability assessment right from there. It's a rule-based lightweight scan. It's going to highlight things such as excessive permissions and unprotected sensitive data. So you do access that via Management Studio. So if you haven't seen that, give that a look, do a bit of reading about that, and maybe run a vulnerability assessment and kind of see where things are sitting at. I mean, I think now with web-based applications, now the norm means your footprint, is enlarged. Public-facing, it's more important than ever. Do you have things like multi-factor authentication to your application? While not necessarily directly related to the database, these are the people that are going to be accessing your databases. So if you're not using multi-factor, certainly take the initiative and certainly start pushing for that from your devs. In terms of your data assets, I mean, you've got more people remote accessing now. They're bringing their own devices. What does that mean? Are you as an operational staff as a whole, both from the Windows point of view and the database point of view, understand what that means for your system? And I think that comes back, as we just talked about, is patching as well. You need to obviously stay current in patching and stay informed, like know what patches are coming out, what security fixes there are. The other thing as well, handy from a SQL point of view, which, it's turned on and it's alerting that maybe we're not looking at it, is auditing your filed logins. Have we got a report there that's showing me my filed login so I can see that and understand that? A summarized version or something I can easily access so I know that someone's been trying to do something nefarious easily without having to go digging through it. The oldies but the goodies, XP command shell, OI automation, open row set, open data set, are they disabled? And I think another one, Phil, that I'll just talk about quickly is, and I find it sometimes overlooked, is do you have a secure database backup folder or blob storage? The amount of places that I see where they're backing up to a location that they don't understand who can access it, or it's not secured at all, is quite high. I mean, and you think about the data risk there is I can stroll in, get in your network, copy your database file and take it. And it doesn't even be an outside attack for nefarious reasons as well. It's just uncontrolled data that can get copied down to a laptop and the laptop can get lost. So make sure that you're securing those database backup locations and that you know that only the correct people can access those files.
Awesome, and I suppose to that point that encryption is at rest as well. Ensure that you're using like TDE, etc., to make sure that that data at rest is secure. So some awesome tips there around security, Steve. So who's heard of GDPR? Who's heard of the Information Security Manual, or ISM? If you're a government agency, you may have heard that term. Perhaps your organisation needs to be APRA compliant. What about ISO 27701? Being compliant with standards may be a fundamental contributor to your organisation's viability, especially so in organisations like in the finance industry. Organisations can be fined or even shut down over failure to comply with regulations. In a crisis such as COVID-19, corners may have been cut, testing may not have been as thorough, quality may have been compromised. This can lead to significant organisational risk. So Steve, what strategies do you recommend to ensure that your organisation's data platform is compliant with standards and regulations?
Well, thanks, Phil. So, as Phil was mentioning, GDPR, ISO, SOX, there's a range of compliance things out there. And I think, we've talked about this a lot, is understanding. It's a term I've used a lot today, but I mean, how can you be compliant if you don't understand what your organisation's compliance needs are? Not only that, once you understand what your compliance needs are, understand the controls within that compliance. As I mentioned before, databases, they're the endpoint. And then again, those boxes, what is accessing your databases and how is it accessing your databases? How can your databases begin to be compliant if you don't know who is accessing those databases? And you don't understand what data is inside those databases. So another tool, 2008 newer, there is data discovery and classification. Again, you can access that from Management Studio. If you haven't seen that, have a look at that. Another good tool for those of you that are already in the cloud in Azure, there's also Azure Data Catalog. It's another way that you can classify your data, so you can easily produce reports and understand what sensitive data you're holding of your clients. You can understand what data, if any, you need to mask to meet compliances. Another good resource is that one I've talked earlier about, the Australian Government Information Security Manual. That's where I was quoting the vendor and patching security controls. If you haven't seen that, they've got a quick PDF guide. It's only a few pages, I think. It's a great little starting point. And again, we've talked about ammunition earlier. It's a great starting point for ammunition and management to say, not only just compliance, but a raft of things. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it, even if you don't have those compliance needs. It's not bad to base some of your things off certain standards. Obviously, it's again, as I said, it's good to go to management. It's also good for you to understand, what those compliances are. Even if you're not putting them to practice the day-to-day, it'll make you think about, as I said, who's accessing that data, what is that data, and how do I secure and display that data to the right people at the right time. So don't just think because you're just a database administrator sitting on the data side of things that compliance, you don't need to understand the compliance. Again, I think it's a great opportunity for database administrators to be leaders within the organisation. Understand the compliance better than anyone and be the leader of compliance, because as I said, as I mentioned earlier, database is the endpoint. Everyone's accessing those. So find out how to treat your data and treat it well.
So in summary there, as the custodian and guardian of your organisation's data, make sure you know what the standards and regulations you must comply with, and then put together a plan to become compliant. So we're on to our 10th and final tip, and it's all about a subject that I'm sure should be near and dear to all DBA's hearts, change control. So, Steve, why is change control so important, in particular in a crisis situation?
Yeah, I think the worst time to start skipping or cutting corners on your change control is during a crisis. Your organisation needs to be aware of what changes are happening, why they're happening, and when are they happening. And without change control, how do you know that? And I think just to talk about that third point there, which is one that I kind of champion and carry on about a bit sometimes, is view change control as an enabler, not a blocker. Make the system work for you as a database administrator. So I've often seen database administrators feel like change control is blocking them from doing things, let's say for patching. Well, depending on the framework that your organisation is using, make a repeatable minor change patching. Make it so that you can make the system start working for you, that you can get your team lead to sign off on those changes. It then means that you're covered because the change control is being followed and that change has been logged and approved. And it also means that you can get that change through when you want. It doesn't have to be seen as a huge undertaking every time that something needs to happen. And if you're not identifying those minor or repeatable changes that need to happen, I think it's a failing. I think you need to understand your change control intimately, and you need to make it start working for you. And a good way to do that is with repeatable changes. When it comes to major changes, be involved in the process, be part of the process, really embrace it. And I think you'll find that if you embrace change control, it really starts working for you. I think if you fight against change control, I think it only takes a couple of things to happen for you to realise why you probably want to change control in the first place, because it's not just about blocking changes, it's making sure the right changes are happening at the right time. So, obviously I'm talking large organisations here in terms of lots of changes happening, but it's also important for small businesses to understand, in 18 months' time, why did that change happen? When did it happen? So it's historical as well as making sure that that the right change is happening. And again, I've talked about it today. I think it's a great opportunity for database administrators to become leaders and really start embracing change control.
Awesome, Steve. Well, that's our top 10 things DBAs should be doing to protect your data during a crisis. In summary, make sure those that need access to your systems know how and know the policies and procedures in order to get access to those systems. Take the initiative. If you are quieter than usual, go and implement some of those initiatives that may have been put on the back burner. Have a look and review your business continuity plan. If you don't have a business continuity plan as a DBA, take the initiative, take that leadership role. You're the guardian of the organization's data, very often seen as their most valuable asset. Go and put a plan together to get that BCP up and running. We're in a new normal. Capacity requirements of our databases may have changed. So start planning and start putting into place changes to ensure that we are providing our database workloads with the resources they actually require in order to efficiently and effectively serve our business. Be proactive. Go out there and run health checks, especially now that there's been a lot of change in a crisis situation where we don't want to inadvertently have an unexpected outage. So let's be proactive and implement initiatives to make sure that incidents don't happen. That leads into the permanently fixing workarounds. If you are holding your workload together with gaffer tape and glue, go out there, do a bit of problem solving and implement a permanent fix. Make sure that your data platform is upgraded, is patched, and you've got a plan in place to make sure that in 2022, if you're sitting on SQL 2012, you've already got a plan in place to get your ERP to the latest version. Make sure that you understand who is accessing your data, and make sure that you've got the systems, you've got the policies and procedures in place to make sure that only people that are allowed access to your data, who are authorized access to your data, actually have access to your data. Make sure you understand your compliance requirements and put a plan in place to implement initiatives to make sure that you comply. And then that last tip there, make sure you don't skip change control. It's absolutely fundamental. So I've open up to any Q&A. Kayla, do we have any questions that have come through?
We don't have too many questions, but we do have a lot of feedback saying the presentation was really good. We've got some people that have requested the T-SQL documentation as well. But yeah, no real questions.
Awesome. So we must have all the answers already. So so we'll review the people that have asked for that, that T-SQL solution, and maybe also PAL, and Steve will be in touch to get you that information. Well, it's been a great pleasure hosting everyone today. Would like to thank Steve. Thanks for putting your time and effort into the webinar. Look out for our newsletter and all of our social media comms out there for the next one. So it's been an absolute pleasure having everyone join us today. We really appreciate it. If you are looking out, for help with your data platform or data analytics solutions, please contact us. Wardy IT Solutions, we are recognised as Australia's leading provider of data platform and analytics, Microsoft-based data platform and analytics solutions. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.